Hey y'all, welcome to the Coyote Trapping School Podcast, episode number 22. In this episode, I'm going to be doing an interview with John Zander from Zander Fur. I'm pretty excited. The next couple episodes are all going to be interview episodes. I hope you're going to get a lot out of them. I think you will. I really enjoy doing the interviews. But John is a third generation in the fur business, and we'll talk about their kind of his family history, what they do in the fur industry, and kind of some general things and intricacies of the fur industry. So I think you're going to enjoy it. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, this was all an audio recording, so there won't be a lot to watch, but I'm still posting it on YouTube just in case people like to play it in the background. I did hear, I was talking to one of the other interviewees, Jeremiah Wood from TrappingToday.com. I interviewed him, and he was talking about YouTube Red, how YouTube Red, if you're a subscriber, you can actually play the videos on your phone, but then close the screen on your phone, and the audio will still play. So I don't know if any of y'all are YouTube Red subscribers, or if you'll actually do that, but I wanted to post it on YouTube as well, just in case you're not a podcast listener on the podcast, but you still like getting this stuff, because I think it's some good, valuable content. So I hope you enjoy it. And we're going to get into an episode with John Zander from Zander Fur.
All right. Well, if you want to jump right into it, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of tell us what y'all's business is, and you can delve right into the history of your business if you want to.
Okay, sounds good, Chris. Thanks for having me on. My name's John Zander. I'm from Zander Fur Company. My family's been in the fur business probably going back to, on some level, back to the 30s. I actually stumbled upon my grandfather's old ledger from when he was a trapper in the late 30s, and he started to buy from local trappers. And then he would kind of just collect for like a local dealer, and that kind of picked up from there. And I guess his three sons started to help him with the business. Then they started to sell to for brokers in New York City for a while. They would still kind of continue buying from local trappers. And then after he passed away, my father just he was working as an engineer at the time. He was laid off, and he said, I'm going to try to give it a go full time in the fur business. He took a gamble, took a trip over to Europe, just more or less just started to knock on doors, just different fur companies. And one thing led to another. He made some good contacts, and instead of going through the brokers in New York, he actually started to buy a lot of fur from them and sell it directly overseas. So at the time, this is like the late 70s, even into the 80s, most of the fur was going just to Europe. There was a lot in Germany. Germany was a huge country for fur. England, Spain, Hungary. Then I guess over time, the market kind of evolved and shifted more toward Asia, Russia. And that's my involvement with the company. Started, I actually always worked here part-time, just all through elementary school, just putting up fur, skinning muskrats.
Right.
I always trapped growing up. I was a trapper. I primarily would trap muskrats, because that's what we have here on the East Coast. I mean, there's so many places to trap muskrats, and it was easy as a kid. So I used to do that quite a bit. I still try to do it when I can get a chance, get out of the office, but I kind of worked part-time all through high school, all through college. When I finished grad school in 2007, there was a kind of a need here at the business, and I wasn't sure if I was going to stick with it or do something else, but I kind of couldn't see myself doing anything else. So I've been here since 2007 full-time. So, and my brother works here also. He started in 2012, so it's definitely we're third generation now in the fur business. So
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. And just while I'm thinking about it, where are y'all located?
we're located in southern New Jersey. We're right outside of Philadelphia, about 15 minutes from the airport in Philly. We're an hour and a half south of New York City. That's kind of helped us quite a bit, because a lot of times we're entertaining customers and all, and they want to go to New York or they want to go into Philly. And there's still actually a bit of a fur business in New York, so it kind of plays right into our location there. It's funny, we get asked a lot from trappers and all across the country, why are you guys in New Jersey? What's with that? New Jersey's not a real big outdoor state, but back in the 70s and 80s, we were buying a lot of local fur. We really weren't buying buying a whole lot outside of like just the region, like the New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York area. And actually our highest volume muskrat year was 750,000 in one 12-month span.
Wow.
So that's just, there was a lot more trappers then, probably a lot more rats, but and as things have kind of changed over the years, now we handle everything. Now we're full service: coyote, raccoon, fox, everything. So but muskrat was definitely our keystone product that kind of got us started.
Gotcha. So just for my personal knowledge, what did you get your degrees in? Were you thinking along the lines of getting into the family business, or were you kind of undecided still?
I was pretty undecided, and so when I graduated high school, I kind of sat down with my guidance counselor, and he said he knew I liked to trap, I liked to hunt, and he said, well, why don't you go for environmental engineering? And I had no clue what that was. I said, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it. So, so I applied for that, and I ended up switching over to mechanical engineering, and I kind of finished that. And I wasn't in love with it. I just couldn't see myself doing that, and all the while still working at the family business. So I said, let me go to grad school, and I got my MBA, and that actually is something that I could really apply to what I do here now. There's a lot more just international business. So I kind of even when I finished grad school, I still just couldn't see myself stepping away from the industry. I just was kind of drawn to it, and it was a natural fit for me.
Yeah, that's cool. That's even I'm a forester by trade.
Oh, okay.
But since I've gotten into it, man, there's so much more emphasis and just attention around the business side of it, and a lot of folks that start with a forestry degree wind up going back to get their MBA just because of how that translates into the business of it. It's a lot more than just planting trees, So.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yep.
All right, so how has the business changed over, y'all been in the business for a long time, from your father's days, and then even from what you've seen since you've been involved?
There's been so many changes, I'd say, in like the last 40 years or so, and a lot of this comes from my father, because I was a young kid. I'm relatively young. I'm 36, so generally now there's a lot less fur produced, and a lot of that has to do with the pricing on certain items. But then there's other items like coyotes that I would expect this year is going to be a record harvest on coyotes, and that's just due to the demand and the prices being so high. And then the customer base has really shifted. Like I touched on earlier, everything was Europe before, and the use of the fur. For example, like muskrat, they would split them up the belly, and now that's like unheard of. All the Chinese plate makers, they split them down the sides. There's belly plates, back plates, and just different trends. The whole industry is just driven by fashion trends, and just the change of that over the years has really dictated the price and the demand of all the different items. And then more recently, like any industry, just the introduction of new technology, the internet, social media marketing, email, texting, there's information that's available to everybody. And it's just tools that make business so much smoother. I can text customers in China, anywhere. I'm constantly in contact. A lot of times there's guys says, let me see what does coyote from whatever western section look like. Let me see a picture of it. I'll do a video chat, kind of show them what it looks like. There's nothing like holding it in your hand and actually feeling the fur, but it definitely helps. It's definitely some tools that have really helped the marketing of our fur.
Sure.
And even with the trappers, it's just, that's one thing now. It's just, there's one thing I will say that it does make things difficult every now and then, because, I'm sure there's so many different sections of fur, and maybe a guy that's got a muskrat that could be used for shearing hears that prices are a little higher, and then you get like some southern fur where guys are, well, this guy got $5, $6 for his muskrat, but why am I only getting $4 or whatever? And it's just it creates a little bit of confusion sometimes, but overall it's definitely there's definitely helpful tools now that weren't available 20 years ago.
Right. So one thing you mentioned there was, when you're talking about muskrats, you mentioned the plates, and the front plate and the back plate. What does that mean?
So mostly they've been used for liners. Almost all the muskrats that come out of the U.S., except for probably a handful, are used for plates. And what they do, they slice them right down the side, and the belly fur and the back fur, there's quite quite a difference in, and they'll just sew a whole bunch of them together and make almost like a fabric out of a bunch of muskrat bellies and muskrat backs. And right now, for the most part, they're being used for liners, just for warmth and like a ski style jacket. It's really popular right now to have the heavier fur trim on the hood and then a muskrat liner. But that's the majority of what the majority of muskrats are being used for right now.
Okay. So what about some of the other species, beaver, coyotes? What do they go to be used for?
Right now, I mean, probably a lot of your listeners are aware, the beaver market has just been geared toward hatters. The expense of shearing a beaver for a garment, and the garments are just not really in style anymore. And that's just kind of played right into the hatter market, where it's sort of provided a floor for beaver, because there always was a hatter market, but it was always, in the past, it would be the damaged beaver, maybe beaver from a section that wasn't shearable. I mean, even the better beaver that, once were used for garments and manufacturing are now going to the hatter market. And it's just it's hard for a trapper. That it's a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work to skin a beaver, catch a beaver, and also the processing to dress a beaver is quite expensive. So it's just kind of provided, a floor for the price where, they're not going to get any lower, I guess. But, it's not like it was maybe 10, 20 years ago where beaver had some different uses that were bringing more money.
And so for the hatter market, that's actually doesn't use the actual hide itself. It's just using the fur, the hair, right?
That's right, just the fur. And then the hide is used for other things. And they use everything. I mean, it's funny. I was talking about the muskrat plates. The heads are actually cut off of the plates, and they'll take those heads and all the scraps, and they'll sew them together and make a plate just out of the heads, just out of the scraps.
Huh.
I mean, everything's used. It's there's no waste. Even in the trimming business, the coyotes, the tails get cut off, they get used for something. The coyote heads get used. And, there's really no waste at all. But then some of the other species, so like raccoon, we talked about a little bit earlier. The trimming market, the heavier coon are kind of on a slight rebound, not what they were, a few years back, but some of the other sections, like the lighter sections, like your area, the semis and the southern coon, they're kind of more used for liners, where like the coat coon used to be used for making coats, and now that's just not a popular thing. So they've kind of been pushed aside, and the prices come down quite a bit on them. There's just not a tremendous demand as, say, like it's like a South Dakota raccoon that just has a lot more heavy fur to it that could be used for trimming. So it's, even within each species, there's quite a variation, and there's different demand depending on the section where it comes from.
Right. What about foxes? I know, like, red foxes at one time in the past, that was like the high dollar item, and now, red foxes and gray foxes, there's not much difference. They're kind of just a regular run of the mill item now.
Yeah, there really hasn't been a tremendous demand for them, because they're not really, most of them aren't heavy enough to be used for trim. Like some of the western stuff can be. We're actually located in a really big red fox producing area from New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania. I mean, they just catch tons and tons of red fox every year, and it's just not an item that really has a lot of demand right now. We've been moving some fox, but it's at a lower price. And the one advantage to that is kind of that when the price gets low, some of the manufacturers aren't afraid to try it. There's not as much of a financial risk for them. They say, now I'm not putting out $50-$60 for a red fox. Let me try them at a lower price. And if it doesn't sell well, it wasn't like I was taking a huge hit on that item.
Sure. So a lot of my just thinking about that and thinking about the end user, a lot of the folks in my audience is kind of geared towards newer trappers and getting people into it. And a lot of the questions when people see put up fur, or see you talking about selling fur, a lot of people just assume that that's tanned, but it's not actually tanned. It's sold, and you buy it in a dried form, right?
Just dry, right? Yeah, we would just term it raw, just raw fur, dried. We do handle wet fur, carcass fur, but we kind of always encourage the trapper to try to dry it. I mean, it's always going to be more value for the trapper especially when the prices are low. I mean, of course, there's some things it's not maybe not worth the trapper's time. A lot of guys I hear say, "Well, I just want to go out and catch more. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time in the shed." But there's a lot of other guys that think that that's a part of the process, and it certainly is. So it can be rewarding too, just being able to finish it, and it's kind of like almost like an art to be able to do it nice and put up fur and have it look nice, and the presentation of your product.
Yeah, that's right. When I first started trapping, I had an older trapper tell me, he said, you're not a trapper until you can put up your fur. If you just trap it and sell it whole or sell it green, he said, you're not a true trapper until you can put it up. And I can appreciate that, because it's satisfying seeing that fur put up. So
yeah, absolutely, sure.
So when you're talking with these buyers, they buy the fur raw, and then they have their own tanneries that they deal with. Are there different tanning processes depending on what they're gonna do with the furs?
Yeah, so there's actually different processes depending on which type of fur it is, even because the different leather is heavier, lighter. There's dyeing, there's shearing, there's plucking. There's all types of processes that are done. We kind of refer to them as dressers, the fur dresser. It's the same as a tannery, but sort of like an industry lingo, I guess. But we don't do any of that on our premises here, but we actually do advise quite often on customers. They'll say, can you check on the goods that are at the dresser, go take a look and see what they look like. And the problem is a lot of the customers, most of them will dress overseas. It's just a lot cheaper than doing it here.
Right.
They just don't have the same maybe regulations that we have here.
Sure.
There's a good amount of tanneries in the U.S. There's a couple that are pretty close to us, right outside of New York City, that we visit pretty frequently. Kind of like I was saying, a customer will say, I got coyotes in dressing, I got muskrats dressing. Look, can you go take a look, see how they're turning out? So it's just kind of an extra service we'll provide just to kind of advise our customers on how the process is going.
Okay. All right. So now, you said when kind of historically the market was heavier towards the fur was going to Europe, but now with kind of China's rise, that's where a lot of the fur is going now, to Asia.
Yeah, I mean, China's just got such a huge consumer base. There's just cheap manufacturing. The dressing costs are much, much cheaper there. There's some just huge dressing factories in China and other Asian countries that I've visited. It's just hard to believe that there's facilities that size that can turn out a lot of fur. I mean, it's really something to see. They are starting to outsource some of their labor. The labor costs have gone up in China, but I mean, still it doesn't compare to a lot of the European countries and U.S. I mean, it's just China's just really they're kind of in the driver's seat in the fur market for sure. They buy more fur than any other country, and I mean, there's really recently we had the tariffs come into effect, but it looks like that's going to be resolved. And that's good news for all of us, because that kind of comes right out of the trapper's pocket. It's just it's got to come right off the top of the price.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of even with shipping costs going to China, just the production cost there is still low enough where that's the place it's going to go.
So is that when it goes there, does it stay in China, or do they just manufacture it and then wind up shipping it out?
A lot of it does stay there, but also a lot of it does go out. A lot goes into Russia, a lot goes into Europe, some comes back to the U.S., but there is a lot of domestic demand also. I mean, right now the Chinese economy is not doing so well, but a few years back when the prices were so high on everything, their economy was doing great, and everybody was trying to buy a luxury item, and fur is the luxury item that fit the bill. So it's kind of in our best interest as trappers and us in the fur business if a country like China is doing well, because they're going to spend their money on our fur.
Right. So talking about the tariffs, what are some kind of overarching things that can affect fur prices and the fur industry in general?
Well, definitely with China, it's right now the number one thing is the tariffs. I mean, I talk daily with some of our customers about it. What's going on? What's the latest news? What's the percentage of tariff going to be? When's it going to be reduced? And that's probably the biggest thing right now. And then also I touched on a little bit the shipping cost, because that a lot of times is built right into the price, and we offer a price to a customer. It includes shipping to their destination, so that's got an effect on the price as well. But there's a lot of other factors too. I mean, there's weather, there's just like economic factors, like like we said, the Chinese economy. I mean, there's so many different things like that. And one thing I didn't touch on yet is the price of ranch fur.
Right.
Wild fur is always going to be affected by ranch fur. Like right now, this week, the Saga auction was going on, and I've been talking to guys all week just to find out what's happening there, what's the prices doing, what's the clearances, and because our wild fur is going to be directly affected by the prices of ranch fur. That's one thing that sort of kept wild mink relatively low, muskrat low, because although they are complementary goods to a lot of ranch fur products, they also compete with them in certain markets.
Right. So what is the relationship of ranch fur to wild fur? If is wild fur seen as a cheaper alternative to ranch fur? So when ranch fur prices go up, wild fur kind of tends to follow because they're trying to go for a little bit cheaper, or what's that relationship there?
It kind of varies a bit by species, but like muskrat, for example, we always kind of joke that muskrat's the poor man's mink. A lot of the, when the ranch mink came down so far in price, the muskrat just followed. And the same thing when, a few years back when muskrats were bringing like, 12, 13, 14, $15, ranch mink were at, historic highs. And it's just a lot of times guys will say, well, ranch mink now, back then, say it was 120, $130. Let me buy a muskrat instead of 10. It's just, it's a lot more affordable for them. And it's sort of like, somebody wants to buy like a nice car that looks pretty nice versus like a luxury car. It's still fur, it's still nice. It's not, but it's not like the top end. But then there's also exceptions. I mean, like for example, the heavy coyote craze right now. I mean, that's sort of a market all of its own. There's different ranch fox used for trim, but that trend of coyote, that look of coyote fur is kind of one in its own, and that's kind of not really. I mean, while it is affected somewhat by ranch fox and other types of trim, it's kind of really holding its own right now.
So it seems to me, just looking at different articles and things, that kind of the amount of ranch fur that is on the market is extremely high. Is that being impacted by these lower prices, and that some ranchers are getting out of the fur market? How is that affected?
Yeah, I mean, it's not directly proportional. A lot of the ranchers are getting out of it. A lot of the Chinese mink farms that kind of popped up when the prices were so high are closing down. And while it definitely does help because it does reduce the supply, it also has to do with fashion. I mean, there's just like a full skin mink coat or jacket really isn't in fashion as much. So while the supply decrease does help, it's not necessarily, a bigger help would be if all of a sudden, like a fashion trend kind of changed. And I mean, for example, the muskrat, their chief use right now will be as liners. They're not even really seen on a lot of the coats when the coats are zipped up. It's just more for warmth than inside the coat. And that's sort of, we're seeing a little bit of an increase in demand in muskrat for that reason.
So if it's just thinking about that, if it's not really seen, is it still cheaper than another lining alternative, or is it just a little bit of added? If you can flash your coat open and somebody sees it as muskrat, so yeah, you did pay more for that coat, or what's that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the consumers maybe can't tell the difference between each species. For example, I mean, like maybe somebody buys a muskrat coat or muskrat line coat, and they don't know if it's mink or not, so it's sort of like you just see that it's fur, and it's sort of like a status symbol.
Right.
He's got fur, and that's one big thing in Asia. It's just fur is really seen as a status symbol. It's, oh, this guy's got fur, he must be successful, must have some money. It's just kind of that's pretty big over there.
Right. So where does most of your fur come from that y'all buy? Are y'all still buying primarily there in the Northeast?
We buy all over the country, from coast to coast. We buy direct from trappers, hunters. We deal a lot with smaller fur dealers. We usually have buyers attend the different state trappers auctions. We really we're big believers in supporting the local groups. I know pretty much, coming up every weekend, we'll have probably 2, 3, 4 different auctions across the country. Either we go to ourselves or we have a buyer there. A lot of guys ship fur in. We get trappers shipping small lots in. We get big lots from dealers. I mean, pretty much all over the place. It was, like I said, when we started in our early days, there was so much fur kind of produced right here in the Northeast U.S. that was just up and down the Atlantic seaboard. That was our primary area, but now we were pretty much all across the country.
Gotcha. Are muskrats still kind of y'all's bread and butter, or?
We still do handle quite a bit of muskrat just because of our position here, geographically on the coast. It's a big item here because there's a lot of waterways and tide marshes that guys trap. But we've handled more coyotes in the past few years than we ever have. We still buy quite a bit of coon. It's kind of more geared by what's in demand. The coyotes are in demand. Muskrat's in decent demand, so that kind of dictates what we buy and what the trappers produce.
Okay. One thing I was looking at here, nutria. Do y'all buy a lot of nutria? What does that go to? Or possum? People always ask, what do you do with a possum or a skunk?
Yeah, possum's a tough item to move right now. We have quite a bit of possum, but it's in the past it was a big European article, but it's kind of we sell some here and there, but there's really not any big use of opossum right now. So that's one thing that I just I don't really see a ton of demand increase on it. So it's kind of we always our philosophy is kind of if somebody's going to catch it and skin it, they should be rewarded with some sort of money for it. So we try to do our best on whatever it is. And the nutria, we used to buy quite a few years back from the south. That's kind of slowed a little bit for us, and there's some also in the Pacific Northwest. That's a little bit heavier nutria that could be used for shearing, so we were doing a little bit of that. Pretty much we handle every type of fur from fox, otter, beaver, mink, just about everything. Muskrat, coons, coyotes.
So do y'all deal in any ranch fur at all, or are you strictly wild fur?
No, we're strictly wild fur. We bump into a lot of people that deal in ranch fur. Most of the wild fur customers deal in both. So we have good exposure to the market, and we're always, of course, keeping an eye on it because it affects our business. But for the most part, we've gotten involved in a little bit of ranch fur deals over the years, but we just primarily target wild fur.
Okay. So what's with trapping season and fur season being a relatively, half or less of the year, what does that, kind of the summertime look like for you so far as your business? Are y'all going out and trying to meet new customers, or?
Yeah, for sure. It's a 365-day a year business for us. We do quite a bit of overseas travel. One of us is always over there. I mean, we're overseas. I've been as much as 5-6 times a year to China. We go to different trade events, China, Europe. Always going to meet customers. We still sell quite a bit of fur over the summer. And there's nothing like visiting your customer face to face. Like we talked about some of the modern technology that's helped the business out. But, actually there's really some value in just going, flying across the world to go see a customer. They really do appreciate that. And that really helps build the business relationships. We do a lot of promotion for wild fur, going to different events. I mean, it's all year long. This is like our peak season now where we're collecting, but even in the summer, there's quite a bit to be done.
Right. So, right now you're more of just getting your inventory, and then for the rest of the year, you're trying to move that inventory.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And I mean, we're moving stuff now. We move it as we buy it, but we always have an inventory of most items, depending on what's in stock and what's in style and what's in demand.
So, do y'all have a cold storage facility?
Yeah, we have a cold storage facility. Yeah, we pack everything up and keep it in there until it's ready to be sold.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, what about some things that you see from the fur handling side that a trapper can put to use? What are some ways that you see fur handled improperly, and ways that trappers can improve in their fur handling to get more money out of their product?
We see quite a bit of some irregular things. I mean, just from seeing such a high volume.
Right.
We see some stuff that's just pretty crazy. I mean, I would say the best tip I can give is, I mean, as soon as you catch that animal or kill that animal, it starts right there. I mean, you want to take care of it and try to present that product in the best possible way. You want to clean all the blood off of it. I mean, for the long hair items, you don't want to mix in with your grease items, like the fur in items. Like, for example, you don't want to put a bunch of really nice coyotes or fox in a bag with a bunch of greasy coon. It's a lot of it has to do with the presentation. And even if whether you're up north catching really nice coyotes or down south, I mean, you should always do whatever you can to make your fur look the best. Just the presentation of it really is important. I would say skin it as soon as possible. Storage at the proper temperatures. A lot of guys I know will let stuff hang for a while, and that blood kind of pools up, and that causes fur slippage. You get green belly, that causes fur slippage. Freezing stuff. A lot of guys I've seen will throw a bunch of skin fur just in a ball in the freezer, and it'll freeze first on the outside, but that inside is still insulated by the outside fur, and it'll start to rot in the middle. I mean, I've seen some real horror stories where guys had some pretty valuable fur that just wasn't handled properly, and it was a real shame that they lost that value just from a couple little things they could have done differently.
Right. What about, and we were talking earlier, you mentioned the money cut and raccoon and also muskrat. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so that's just sort of like an attempt to kind of make the skin look a little bigger than it is. Maybe taking some skin off the belly and put it on the back, and we recognize it right away. And it's just kind of, our customers recognize it right away. It's sort of like a misrepresentation of what the size actually is. And like we were talking about muskrats, the belly plates are actually in higher demand right now than back. So you're actually taking a part of the animal that's worth more and putting it on the other side of the animal. So it's you're making that belly side actually worth less than what it should be. So it's kind of shooting yourself in the foot, I guess, doing something like that. And then another thing is just stretching. A lot of times you'll see guys try to do like a narrow stretch just to make it look a little longer, but in reality you're kind of more just looking for total area on the fur, because a lot of the customers don't even see the fur until it comes out of dressing. And when it comes out of dressing, maybe it measures, say, an extra large or 2X, and then when it comes out of dressing, maybe it measures a large. So that's kind of bad for everybody.
Gotcha. That makes sense, because when it's tanned, I mean, it's going to go back to its original form, right? Or its original size.
It might be like a coon could be. Now we've seen coons stretch like 4 inches wide. It's really long, but it's just not it's just not the proper stretch.
Right. So how does fur in? How does those products get graded versus fur out? Are you looking more at the hide side than the actual fur itself?
Yeah, you can actually tell quite a bit about the fur on the inside just by looking at the leather. It kind of tells the story of the animal's history, when it was harvested, their scars, things like muskrat. You can see the coloration on the leather. Even looking at the leather side of a beaver, it tells quite a bit about, you can look at the leather side of a beaver and flip it over and say, I know I'm going to see some sort of imperfection in this spot or that spot in the fur when I flip it over. The fur out, a lot of times it's for the most part long hair. We want to see, is there slippage, the color, the texture, things like coyote, fox, even gray fox. We like to have fur out just to get a better look at it.
Okay. Well, what is there anything that you see upcoming in the next 5, 10, 20 years for the future of trapping in the fur industry? So far as trends of pricing, are we're going to see prices come back soon, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely seeing some increased demand for certain items, and kind of what we touched on earlier with the lower prices on things. It kind of gives some manufacturers that maybe got out of certain items to kind of jump back in again with less risk, and that's always good. I mean, we can, maybe we'll discover guy starts using something that hasn't been popular and finds a market for it, and it kind of takes off, and it sort of has a trickle down effect where it might start to increase over the years. I expect there's definitely going to be a shakeup in the industry. We talked about the mink ranches in China in particular, and there were just tons and tons of them, and it's really hard to get a handle on how many mink China produces because it's all done internally. There's really not like an auction where you can kind of get a I mean, we have a pretty good idea, but it's just, you go over there and it's just like, acres and acres of ranch mink farms, and a lot of them are closing down and killing stock. That's going to for sure have an effect. And like we said, just because they're closing, it doesn't necessarily mean an instant increase in price in wild fur, but it doesn't hurt either.
Right.
And then it's hard to really predict which new fashion trends are going to come along. Like the heavy coyotes. I hate to say that trend could run its course in the next 5, 10, 15 years, but if the industry is taught us anything, usually the trends do sort of kind of dissipate after a while, and then a new trend sort of pops up.
Right.
There's a lot of smaller boutique designers that are doing custom fur work that have gotten into wild fur, and they're also influenced by the latest trends. And one concern that we have for sure is just keeping kids involved in trapping. It's kind of a sport where it's dominated by older guys, and there's so many different activities that kids can choose from, and that's one factor. But it's really important to get a kid out there and get them interested. The future of our sport and our industry depends upon it, and I know some of my best memories growing up as a kid were my dad taking me out trapping muskrats and red fox, and I look forward to doing the same thing with my kids.
That's right. I can't tell you how many folks that, just from my posting things on social media and stuff, they'll comment they're not a trapper, but that was not a trapper anymore. But, they remember going with their dad or granddad. And a lot of times that's, from what I've seen, how folks kind of get back into it is once they start having kids and they think about that, and then they start kind of getting the bug again and wanting to kind of.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's for sure. It's really important. We want to keep our sport alive, kind of passing it on to the next generation is the best way to do it.
So kind of talking about that, do you see the wild fur acceptance changing in the U.S.? Do you see wild fur getting more prevalent and more used here nationally?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely been more of an acceptance. I think we have a pretty educated consumer base here in the U.S. A lot of the animal rights groups that kind of at one time, I guess, had a little bit more power, kind of been exposed for using misinformation and kind of some marketing techniques that really weren't successful for them. I know there's been some of those fur bans publicized recently, but it's pretty. If you look at it a little bit deeper, it's pretty inconsistent because a lot of those designers that are not using fur anymore are still using leather, and the ratio of leather to fur is just unbelievable. And I mean, what's leather? It's just it's fur without the fur. So
that's right.
I mean, the more educated consumers now, I think they know. One thing that I like, an example I like to use is like that farm to table movement, and it's very similar for the wildfire industry. I mean, there's a story behind every animal trapped. It's a story of conservation. Trappers are following laws that are put in place for management purposes, and I think a lot of people are starting to pick up on that. Especially, I know, like in this area, we have a lot of the urban coyotes, and I think once people sort of see that moving in toward their neighborhoods and near their pets and all, they sort of realize, like, all right, there's a purpose for the trapper to come and kind of keep those animal populations in check. There's a big push for traceability. We've implemented a traceability program for a lot of our trappers. Fur is being marketed now as renewable, green. It's a much better choice than faux fur. There was a pretty good article in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks back about real fur versus faux fur, and it was more pro fur than that's a mainstream publication. So things like that are really positive signs for the industry.
Sure. So talking about your traceability, that kind of intrigues me because I see a lot of that, a huge amount of that with my job as a forester, being SFI certified, and it's not so much nationally here, but the people overseas are very concerned about the sustainability and the renewability of it. So what does your tracing mechanism look like?
So basically, we just try to make sure that the trappers are following all the laws that they should be. It's pretty much voluntary. They can tell us as much information as they want or as little as they want. But we try to be able to show our customers that we're taking steps to do things responsibly and ethically, just to try to show that this is not just an unregulated industry where people just want to go out and kill things. It's a lot more than that, and we're trying to do whatever we can to educate both our customers and just the general public that this is it's a good industry. It's an ethical industry, and everybody's responsible. The trappers are responsible. They're good, hardworking people, and that's sort of why we got involved with the traceability program.
Gotcha. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but just like I said, in listening and hearing conversations around the forestry industry, I know that is a huge concern overseas, more so than here for sure. So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah,
I like
absolutely.
that.
And that's just the more educated consumer. They want to know where their product came from. I read an article about some different commercial fishermen that are doing the same thing. They can tell I caught this fish or this crab at this location on this day, and people like to hear the story behind it and know that what they're buying is actually an ethically produced product, and that can only help us, for sure.
That's right. Okay. Well, man, that's good stuff. I really enjoyed. Man, I've enjoyed talking with you. I wouldn't mind maybe touching base with you again, and
yeah, absolutely, sure. I'd love to come back on. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, you bet. So what? Give us your contact information if somebody's interested in trying to sell y'all fur, send y'all fur. How does somebody go about doing that?
Probably the best way is to visit our website. It's just www.zanderfur.com. It's just ZANDERFUR, and all the information on how to ship fur to us is in there. I can get you in touch with. If we don't come directly to your area, maybe a dealer that we deal with, feel free to email us, call us. I have trappers that text me at night when I'm at home and they ask me questions, and it's just I'm really glad to help anybody, especially kids like we were talking about.
Sure. Speaking of which, is there any place, any resources that you direct people when you run into people that are on the fence or not the radical antis, but just kind of have a bad perception? Is there any place that you send folks that you found to be a good resource for digging into that?
Yeah, I mean, there's all different organizations that people can look into. A lot of times I'll try to talk to people myself and just kind of relate it to personal experiences that I've had, maybe something that somebody who doesn't trap can relate to. That's probably I try to always keep it on a personal level. I think it's easier for people to relate to a personal story or an experience.
Right. Well, that's good stuff, man. I enjoyed it. I appreciate you coming on here, and
sure.
I like learning. Like I said, I've been trapping since I was in high school, but I've never really had a introduction really into the fur market and all. I've always just sent my fur off, and kind of what it is what it is. So I enjoyed this, and what's y'all got an Instagram channel? Are you on Facebook, any place like that?
We're on Instagram. It's just @Zander Fur. So give us a follow, give us a like.
All right. Well, I'll sure pass that along to everybody. And anything else you want to add or cover?
No, I think that's it. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it too, and I hope we'll be in touch again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.